So, of course, he plays queen takes e7 to, well, retake, but in addition, that puts the queen in a much more essential position. It protects all the weak squares, protects this square, protects that square, which otherwise would have had hanging pawns. And so now it's my turn. So now it's time to focus in on that weak spot. And that weak spot is this pawn, the d6 pawn, so I play rook d3. Rook d3, obviously I'm going to double up on this. He may double up on the g file, that's fine, but I'm going to double up on the d file. So he plays bishop e6, realizing that otherwise this pawn is going to become a weakness sooner or later. That queen isn't going to be able to sit there and protect the f7 pawn forever. So he would much rather trade it off rather than to have my light squared bishop be a very powerful piece. So I don't really have any great places to move my light squared bishop. If I move it to somewhere else, this pawn could hang, so I trade it off. I play bishop takes e6, he plays f takes e6. He wants to build up, at least now he's got a place so that he can try to build up this square, the d5 square. Maybe eventually this pawn will be able to move there. So I continue building up on his weak spot, rook fd1. Now he's got a little bit of trouble over here. He's only got one piece defending this pawn, and I've got two pieces attacking it. So now, rather than defending it, this was an interesting move over here. He could have, a typical move at first glance is just simply to play rook d8. You play rook d8, you defend it twice. But I guess he realizes eventually I'm going to be able to build up on this pawn. This rook is never going to be able to swing around and defend this pawn. The queen, maybe I'll move my rook to d2 and then move my queen to the back line to e1, and then I'll have the Alekhine battery where you have the queen, rook, rook, and there's no way this pawn is going to be able to be defended in the long run. So instead, he decides, a little bit of a counterattack here. He plays d5. Even though it's not protected, the pawn is going to be lost, but he figures the best defense sometimes is a good offense, which inherently is not a bad strategy. At least he's trying to make something good out of the fact that he had a very weak pawn over here. So of course I take. There's no reason not to. And now, rather than retaking, which there's no reason to do that because he loses the pawn anyway, instead he plays f5. You see what he's trying to do. First of all, obviously, he's threatening to win a rook by playing e4, which, because it's protected. In addition, he's saying, all right, well, look, you're going to have a strong pawn on the d file. Well, maybe I'll have a strong pawn on the e file. And, you press in the center, well, I'll try to also press in the center. So now, I could move the queen to protect it, but rather than do that, I want to solidify my pawn and solidify the fact that I'm going to have a nasty passed pawn on the d file, and I play d6. Now he's got to move his queen, obviously. He could, I suppose, play e4 over here. Then if I take, he takes, I retake. I'm going to win. I'm going to win a pawn or two if that happens. So he plays queen d7. Now, of course, what do? Rook c3. Why rook c3? Well, obviously what that does is it eliminates the possibility of him playing d4 and winning the rook. But what it also does, if you think about it, it's a brutally effective move. Because now obviously this rook is still protecting the pawn. This pawn is in tremendous position. But what it really does is it threatens to put the rook on the 7th rank. Rook c7 right now is being threatened as a brutal move. Once he has to move that, first of all, this pawn's going to fall. Let's say if it were my move, I play rook c7, he's going to move the queen to the back rank, I take the b pawn, I could take it with the queen, or I can take it with the rook. I mean, you could imagine how brutal that would be. Imagine I go over here, he moves the queen, then I take it with the queen. I take the b7 pawn with the queen, and now I've got a queen and the rook on his 7th rank, threatening to take this pawn, threatening to move up this pawn, and it would just be an absolutely brutal attack. So he plays e4, again trying to at least get some kind of a counterattack. Queen e3. Now, what is he going to do? Again, there's not much. He realizes, I guess, at this point, he's not going to be able to defend for very long. He's got to get some kind of counter chance going. So he plays rook a g8. Now I have a slight pawn weakness over here. I did that before to fend off the possibility of him bringing his bishop down here to g4, but I've got a little bit of a pawn weakness over here. So if I simply play g3, which I could do, this pawn would hang. It's not hanging immediately, but it could certainly become a weakness eventually. But, at this point I don't really have a lot of choice. The only way to save the pawn is to move it, so I play g3. So what does he do? Interesting move. He plays e5. Threatens a couple of things. Obviously, it threatens to come down with the f4, to f4, and then I'm in trouble because this pawn is pinned, so the queen has to move. He could take it with the pawn, and all of a sudden, if I retake, he takes with the rook. It could get a little troublesome for me. I mean, you can play out the variations. So the first thing I have to do is I have to unpin the pawn. Well, actually, before that, I guess I can unpin the pawn a little later. First thing I do is bring down my rook to c7. Really, as I was planning to do before. And that forces his queen to vacate the seventh rank. It's almost like each side is just going for the kill. Each side is rather than each trying to defend against the other one's threats, you try to make sure your threat hits home first. So he plays f4. Obviously, this pawn is still pinned, so I have to move the queen. So queen takes e4, and now of course this pawn hangs. So he comes down here, queen take h3. Now obviously I had thought about that for a while. And it looks like he has a brutal attack going over here. In fact, if he has one move, he's going to mate me. He's going to mate me very quickly. He takes with the rook, for example. If he's able to take this pawn, and then I retake with the f pawn, he comes down with the rook. I've got to move the king here. He moves the queen here, and I'm going to be mated. I'm going to be mated very quickly. But unfortunately for him, this pawn is hanging. A moment ago, before I was able to take that pawn. For example, when I took e4, e5 is hanging over here. And it's not just the fact that it's hanging. It's the fact that it's hanging with check. And notice the fact that no matter if this pawn hangs, if I take this pawn, the king, he's going to have to move a rook or something in front of the king to block it. And whatever he moves there is going to be pinned, because it's going to be pinned by the queen. Now, he could have just simply defended by putting the queen over here, for example, putting the queen on e6. But if he puts the queen on e6, it doesn't help him in the long term. It may protect the pawn for right now, but he's got to attack, because if he doesn't attack, maybe I march the pawn down. The pawn's got two more moves, and then it becomes a queen. And once it becomes a queen, and I have an extra queen, well, then it's really of no use. He can't be on the defensive. The only way for him to win this game is by coming down here and mating me with his rooks and his queen flying across the board over here. Trying to be held back by this pawn, my e pawn is gonna cause havoc a lot more quickly than he's gonna be able to stop it. So he plays queen h3. So, of course, with the abandoned e pawn, I play queen e5, queen takes e5 check. And with queen takes e5 check, I made the calculation. I realized pretty much no matter which rook he puts in front of his king, he's going to be in trouble. If he would have put this rook, the 3 rook, in front of his king, then I can take. Well, then I can take with the rook. He retakes, and then I move the pawn up. And the pawn's going to queen next move since the rook is hanging. Either way, he puts rook a g7. Doesn't really matter that much in the long run. Rook takes g7, rook takes g7, then I play d7. And at this point, he doesn't really have much of a chance. Either way, I'm going to queen next move no matter what he does. Unless, of course, he sacrifices... let's put it this way. Let's say he sacrifices the rook. Let's say he takes... if he takes the rook, then... Obviously, I can't retake right away because it's being protected by the queen also. Then I could play queen d8 check. And once I play queen d8 check, and then he has to move it, I retake. I retake with the queen. He has to take, and then I retake. I mean, well, just to give you an idea, let's say, for example, if for example, if he takes. I'm sorry. Well, no, actually, he can't take that anyway. Okay, I don't know what I was thinking. But anyway, what he actually does is to play. What he actually does, really, which is the only move to avoid mate, he plays h5, which is really the only thing to avoid mate at this point. He probably could have resigned before that move, but I guess he figured maybe there would be some way to. Remember, he's not that far away from checkmating me over here, but so of course I just simply play d8, and notice that weakness has come to full fruition at this point. I've now gotten a queen on that file, and at this point he simply resigns the game. I've got an extra queen, so eventually there's really not a whole lot he's going to be able to do. He's going to have to move his king over here. Remember, he can't move the rook because it's pinned. I can take this pawn to, to virtually end the threat. I can bring the rook down. I mean, there's virtually unlimited possibilities that I have over here, and none of them result in anything like a competitive game. So I think this was an interesting game. Again, I think it showed that weakness of making that d pawn backwards by playing e5. Playing that e5 way back when, near the beginning of the game. At this point, where was it? Yeah, here. At this point, playing that's an attractive move, but it very often isn't worth it. I've won a few games where that d pawn has turned out to be a weakness later on in the game because of playing d5 to threaten the advanced queen. Okay, so thank you very much for watching, and please feel free to leave any comments, and I'll see you next time.